Insta, and we're going to see how we go with YouTube. You're live. Welcome to the Sabbath Bible Lessons Teachers Helps, and welcome on Instagram, and welcome on YouTube. Give me my microphone over here. Hopefully, you guys out there can hear me. If you can't, just give me a comment. Let me know that you can hear me. And you guys, Instagram, hopefully you can hear me too. So what we're doing, we're going through lessons from the book of Mark. Sabbath Bible Lesson Teachers Helps. Now, if this is the first time you've joined us, what I'm doing is I'm not actually teaching the lesson, but I'm going through it, highlighting some points that I would be bringing out as a teacher. And remember, before you go into any class as a teacher, you want to keep a couple of things in mind. Number one is the overall objective of Sabbath school, the most important lesson for everyone to learn. And that lesson, according to Councils on Sabbath School Work, that's the lesson that Christ gave to Nicodemus, and that is the experimental knowledge of what it means to be born again. That's the knowledge that we need to have as teachers. That's the knowledge that we want to impart to our students, that they need to be born again. They need to be born of the Spirit to have a renewal of their spiritual life, to turn the heart from self to selflessness, to love and Christ's righteousness. So this is what we want. We want to have that experience ourselves, and we want to impart that experience to our students. Well, we can't do it ourselves, but it's of God and His Word. And that's why our focus in the Sabbath school is the Word of God. So that's why it's called Sabbath Bible Lessons. They're not Spirit of Prophecy lessons. They're not human lessons. These are Bible lessons, okay? So I want you to emphasize, we should emphasize, keep that in mind. Second point is we need to go into each class with a clear objective. Now, the objective for Sabbath school, the overall objective, of course, is the salvation of souls. All right. But the objective when I'm teaching the lesson, when you, if for those who've been to my Sabbath school seminars, I take you through a method of arriving at the objective for the lesson. And that method is called macro, micro, macro. Now, what that means is that each week we have a Sabbath, we have one lesson that covers 5 days. Okay. So it's divided into 5 sections. Just let me get to today's section. The lesson objective is going to be based on the key points from each section. That is, if you go through Sunday, there'll be one key point. The idea is given in the title of the section, but also if you summarize that, what would be the take-home point for your class for that day? What's the one thing you want your students to get out of the lesson for that day? And that's what becomes your micro point for that day. The same with Monday, the same with Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So you end up with 5 micro points, 5 points that summarize the questions for that day. That is, what's the one thing you want your class to get out of that day? Now, those 5 points become 5 brief sentences. Now, at the end of it, you'll be summarizing those 5 sentences into an overall objective of the lesson, which is the macro point. That is the main point from the lesson for that day. What is the one thing that I want my class to go home with out of the lesson for this day? And the idea, it's brought out, firstly, you get a clue from the title, obviously, but the key verse and also the key note that's here. So if you're preparing as a teacher, these are things you want to be focusing on. It gives you a method to it. You actually go to summarize it. The first thing I always do is I highlight all the Bible verses. I actually cut and paste those into a separate document, and I divide them into their relevant sections for each answer. And then I read through those verses, highlight the points I think are good points to bring out, do a bit of background research to get if I don't understand the context of some of those verses, and then I look at the notes. And then that gives me a good idea of what to bring out from that lessons for that day. So another thing I bring out or I utilize as well is this markup code. And now the asterisk, I've got four items to the code: an asterisk, which is a new concept. The arrow is a personal need. The hash symbol is a personal help and something the class should understand. Sorry, the plus symbol is a personal help, and a hash symbol is something the class should understand. So that's what you want to be bringing out from your lesson. Just give me 1 minute here because I just got to copy this and bring it across. I'm just going to highlight a link here. Sorry, guys. Give me 1 minute. Just let me bring this up. Who's on Telegram? Okay. Sorry. Anyway, it's taken some time, but that's going to be. Where are we here? Sorry, guys. Just bear with me a minute. Technology, I hate it when it's not working. One-man show here, people. So years old. So it really needs an update to the computer. All right. And we are, come on. Sorry, people. My apologies. It's not going to work. Anyway, sorry, guys. So I will be highlighting, as a teacher, I'm just mostly put that pound symbol or hash symbol beside a key thought that I want to bring out, which I think would help, is underlines the key point for that day. Okay, so you see here, I've got one here for Monday and one here, Sunday, I should say, one here for Tuesday, Monday, I should say, Monday. I've got another one over here for Tuesday, one for Wednesday, and you can see too, I've got some asterisks there as well, because there's some concept I'm going to discuss in the class. So that's just a little markup that you could use to help you. Now, what that does, say I've got only 5 minutes left, we're only on Wednesday. Well, that lets me turn quickly to the page. Say I'm on Tuesday. Say I'm on Tuesday, and I've got 5 minutes left. I can quickly turn to Wednesday, see the hash symbol, and know that that's the focus of that day. So that's where I want to bring out. I've only got a couple of minutes left. Let me ask questions focused on that hash point. Okay, the same with Thursday. So that's really the quick way of doing it. You shouldn't have only 5 minutes left with still 2 days. Lesson. All right, this is from the book of Mark. We're getting to the end now. This is the second last lesson of the quarter. All right, what happened? This was his betrayal. It says here, forsaken by friend and foe. That's the lesson title. And what are some lessons that we can learn from us? Verse 50, they all forsook him and fled. All right. The Son of God was afflicted. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. The majesty of heaven had to leave the scene of his labor again and again because of Satan's bruising his heel. And finally, Satan's malignity reached its utmost power when Satan inspired and controlled the minds of wicked men to crucify him. That's Jesus. So that's what the lesson is about. And key point I got, now I don't know what you got in your lesson for the day, but I got, let me just see here, what the key point I got is, all right, which is this. Though Christ was forsaken by all, God never forsook him because he trusted fully in him. So it may be with us. So no matter how dark and despair you may be feeling, how much despair you may be feeling, and how dark and down you may be, God will never forsake you or leave you if you put your trust firmly in him. And we're going to highlight here some things that will help us do that that we learn from the experience of Jesus. So let's have a look here. Firstly, under Sunday, betrayed by a friend. Have you ever been betrayed by a friend? I feel like I have a number of times. Not very pleasant. And for Jesus, it cost him his life. Let's have a look here. Under the first section, what would I be highlighting here? Well, firstly, the friend that this section brings out is Judas. Judas is referred to in Mark 14, verse 10, as one of the 12. Okay, he was the disciple who was recommended by the disciples. He was put forward by the disciples. Jesus didn't choose him. The disciples chose him. They put him forward and he became recognized as one of the 12. But he would be what we would call a tear, okay, because he was never fully committed to Christ. He had a problem. His problem was the love of gain, right? He had the love of gain. He was sharp in business, and he loved gaining money, and he became the treasurer for the group, and he used his talents and his capabilities to hoard, if you like, the finances of the disciples. All right, he was one of those guys hard to give money away. All right, when he pulled his wallet out, when he pulled the purse out, moths came out of the purse. All right, whenever he opened it, that's how often the purse was opened. You would see him with Judas. Judas was a speculator. The note brings out. You see, the problem with Judas was he had a superficial religion. It was just on the surface. As we're learning from the previous lessons, many of the people expected the Messiah to establish his kingdom. The expectation of the Messiah, based on Bible prophecy, was very high in the time of Jesus, and all the people were expecting his kingdom to be established, and that is a temporal kingdom, a worldly kingdom, an earthly kingdom that would free them from the power of the Romans, from the power of bondage, and that the Messiah would establish his kingdom, and the Jewish nations would rule with him over all the earth. And Judas wanted to be a part of that kingdom. They thought this was the Messiah, and so Judas was looking at the temporal side of things, always at the temporal, not at the spiritual. And that's what I'll be highlighting here. And so his was a superficial religion, just touched the surface, didn't take deep root in his heart. He did not surrender his heart to Christ. He followed Christ, clinging to his selfishness and sin. Okay, and that's a real problem. What did it lead to? Well, Judas's desire for gain got the better of him to the point where, put this together. If he believes that this is the Messiah who's going to deliver the Jews from all the power of Rome, surely he can deliver himself from the priests, and that's what Judas reasoned. And therefore, well, I'm going to betray him to them, and I'm going to get some money for it, and then Jesus will deliver himself. And so Judas did that. He betrayed Jesus, betrayed him with a kiss. He sold him for 30 pieces of silver to the priests, he accompanied the soldiers, the temple soldiers, and the high priests, the chief priests, and the Pharisees and the scribes to the place where Jesus was, and then he betrayed Jesus by a kiss. He said to the priests, "Whoever I kiss, he's the one." And the moment Judas kissed him, the soldiers arrested Jesus. So it was directly through Judas, one of the 12, who'd been with him for 3.5 years. Sadly, speculation. His speculation was based on a false assumption, and it led to betrayal and death. So that's sadly what happened with Judas. Now, believe it or not, this was prophesied in Psalm 41, verse 9. You'll see here, "My own friend in whom I trusted has lifted up his heel against me." Psalm 41, verse 9. That expression, "lifted up his heel against me," what's that talking about? Well, the imagery is really of a horse and its master, the horse that kicks up or kicks out at its master. That's what it means by "he lifted up his heel against me." Perhaps when you're behind the horse, he just kicks with his heel at his master. So Judas was like a horse doing that, just kicking Christ in the guts after all that Christ did for him for 3.5 years. After all that he had offered him, the love that he showed towards him, the patience he showed towards him. And Judas, it was just a kick in the guts for Jesus. And that's what happened. And it was prophesied, Psalm 41, verse 9. So Jesus was betrayed and taken to the court where he was going to be tried. And that leads us now to Monday. Now, what's interesting, so this is what I would highlight here. Well, actually, before I go to Monday, so I've got my micro point for Sunday is, if we only have a superficial religion, this is the point. If we only have a superficial religion, ultimately it will lead to our betrayal of Christ and our eternal death. That's what happened with Judas, and that's what will happen to us. We'll end up just forsaking Christ, betraying him, putting him to shame, and ultimately lose our own salvation. So that's one of the points I'd highlight there as a micro point. The second section, deserted by a close friend. All right. So first he was betrayed by a friend. Now he's deserted by a friend. And believe it or not, which friend was this? This was the friend who had said what? Well, it's brought out here in Mark 14, 27 to 31. Though all should betray thee, also, sorry, though all should be offended because of thee, yet will not I be offended. Now, who said those words? You'll remember if you read the lesson. Peter, the disciple who was the most impetuous. He was the most vocal among the disciples. He was a leader among men, Peter was. But he was also one who was quick to speak up, but little did he know himself as he really was. And he would soon get to know himself. Okay, so here he said, I will go to you to death. And what did Jesus say to him? Jesus said to him, Peter, before the cock crows 3 times, you will deny me twice. So that was a prophecy that Jesus knew Peter. And I guess Jesus, he could have said nothing to Peter. But here I think Jesus, I'd be bringing out here, Jesus was preparing Peter for what lie ahead. He knew Peter loved him. He did. Peter was genuine in his devotion to Jesus. He just didn't know himself as he really was. He had a lot of lessons to learn. And Jesus gave him this prophecy, I believe, to prepare him so he would not become so discouraged. See, Jesus knew him, and Jesus would also uphold him during the time of his greatest trial. That's when he was taken into the judgment. Oh, so the court to witness Christ's trial. So what happened? Well, verses 66 to 72 of Mark 14 bring out what happened. Here we have the situation where Peter denies Jesus. He denied him once when someone said, are you one of his disciples? There was a woman there. He said, no, I'm not. No, I don't even know. No, I'm not. And someone else said it. Yeah, you're one of him, aren't you? You're one of them, those disciples. No, I'm not. I'm not. And then the third time, someone said, yes, for sure you're one of them. Aren't you a Galilean? And your speech betrays you. Well, what it was that Peter and the disciples were known for the fact that their speech was pure, not with expletives. They didn't use expletives. They didn't use swearing. And so Peter wanted to give a demonstration truly that he was not of Christ. Why? Because he feared what they might do to him. He didn't, sure, he was there to see Christ, to witness him, but he didn't want the people to arrest him. And so he was fearful of that. And his fear got the better of him. And he ended up cursing and swearing and saying, I know not the man. Now, the first time Peter denied Christ, the cock crew. The third time he denies him now, immediately the cock crew. At that point, Peter realized the words of Jesus, before the cock crows twice, you'll deny me thrice. And the note brings out that he looks to Jesus, and Jesus at that instant looked to him. And that look broke Peter's heart. And he went from that courtyard and ran away weeping bitterly, because he knew that Christ's words were true. Christ's words had been fulfilled. He had denied Jesus. How he felt terrible, almost to despair. But you know what? I think Jesus' look and the fact that Jesus had prophesied this would happen gave assurance that Christ knew Peter and knew what he would do. And yet Jesus didn't condemn him. He just looked at him with a pity and love. And this was an assurance to Peter that even though you've denied me, Peter, I still love you. And that was assurance for Peter that he would be forgiven. Anyway, he was terribly upset with himself and with what he had just done. And he repented bitterly. This experience where Christ is thus betrayed by his friends, forsaken by his friends, it's prophesied the kind of feelings he must have had. Question C brings out the feelings here in Psalms 88, verse 8, Psalm 69, verse 8, Job 19, 13, and 14. Some various verses there bringing out, thou hast put away my acquaintance far from me. Thou hast made me an abomination unto them. So, some of these people, like David, felt like he was an abomination to his friends. And I'm sure Jesus must have felt the same, because they've all forsaken him. Job 19, verse 13, he has put my brethren far from me, and my acquaintance are verily estranged from me. So they were put far from him. They weren't there by his side to support him. And Job 19, verse 14, they said, it says there that my kinsfolk have failed. and as my relatives have failed, and my friends have forgotten me. That's sadly that's what some of the Bible writers, the experiences they went through, and I believe Jesus felt exactly the same. Deserted by those he came to save. And yet, he did not give up. Even though his friends forsook him, his those who were nearest to him and dearest to him forsook him, they betrayed him, they did not want to be known as his followers, yet nothing could stop him from laying down his life for them. And that's an important point that I'd be bringing out here. So I've got that highlighted here, that Jesus, nothing could have induced Christ to leave his honor and majesty in heaven and come to a sinful world to be neglected, despised, and rejected by those he came to save, and finally to suffer upon the cross, but eternal redeeming love, and which will ever remain a mystery. So Jesus, that love that he was, that eternal love of Jesus will forever remain a mystery. It was that induced him to leave the courts of heaven to come to our little world and go through all this suffering, this betrayal, the dissertation, the reviling, the abuse he suffered, all of it. He did that for you and for me. So that's something that I'll be bringing out there. And so for question 2, section 2, my micro point, though we may have forsaken Christ, forgotten him, his eternal love constantly seeks to win us back. And that's really what happens. That's really what he does. All right. So never be discouraged, right? No matter how bad you are, no matter what you feel that you've done against Christ, against others, feeling like that you're forsaken of God, you're not. If you will only realize that Jesus is reaching out his hand to you. That's something I'll be bringing out to my class, okay? Section 3 is Tuesday, despised and rejected of men in general, all right? He's despised and rejected of men, it was prophesied. So under here, I've got the hash symbol under C here, because I think that's where that's the point that I'll be bringing out. That's here, but we see here under this section the actual court case going forward. Now, this is a sham. It's a kangaroo court. The high priest is officiating. They've gathered together witnesses against Christ. The problem here is, for a crime, especially a capital offense, you needed 2 witnesses, right? Unless 2 witnesses could testify against the person, they could not be found guilty. So the chief priests, they knew they needed 2 witnesses, so they had false witnesses. They paid the money, but guess what? None of them could agree. The details they were just not in agreement with each other. So no matter what was said, neither one could agree with the other, and so there was never 2 witnesses there. And finally, they asked Christ, and he was asked, "Are you the Christ? Are you the Son of God? Are you the Christ? And are you Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus now, with this direct question, now answers, because the glory of God is at stake here. All right, this is the only time he answers throughout this trial directly the question of the priests. And he says it here in this way: "I am, and you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven." Now, that was a witness against the priests, and particularly the high priest here. But Jesus was confirming the reality that he was the Son of God, the Christ. Some might argue, well, when would the high priest see Jesus coming if the high priest died? Well, Revelation 1 verse 7 brings out, Revelation 1 verse 7 and 8 there, that you shall see the Son of Man. Behold, he comes with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him. So every eye will see him, and those that put him to death, which includes the high priests, all right? So they would see Jesus coming, which suggests to us a special resurrection. Daniel 12:2 talks about that. Just before Jesus comes, many will arise to see Jesus coming, including those who are the most violent opposers of Jesus and his message. They'll see Christ in the clouds of heaven coming. All right, so just that's something that you might want to bring out, but that's just a little sidelight there. But now when Jesus speaks these words, something happens here which is significant. And that is that the high priest in those days is a form of great grief. When someone died, usually if the family members would rend their clothes is a sign of utter sorrow. My heart's broken. They just tear their clothes. But here, the high priest, he was, the actual stipulation in Leviticus 21 verse 10, the high priest was not to rend his garment. Now here, the high priest rends the garment. Now, Jewish scholars say that, there was a different way that he could rend it. He rend it from, that was different to anyone else. It was okay to rend it for blasphemy, but the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible just says there in Leviticus 21:10, he is not to rend the garment. And so by doing that, he actually pronounces upon himself a death sentence without knowing it. And that's what the note brings out. By the law of God, he was disqualified for the priesthood. Okay, so that's a significant point there. And so, how did all this trial fulfill prophecy? Well, beautiful chapter, a chapter which is the closed chapter to many Jews, but it's Isaiah chapter 53, the suffering servant. Surely all the Jews believed the Messiah would come and deliver them from bondage, but none of them believed the Messiah would go through any suffering to do that. Isaiah 53 brings out the reality that he would suffer, and he would suffer for all. He would suffer for their transgressions, for our iniquities, it says, there was laid upon him, and our transgressions. And he is brought despised and rejected of men, it says, and he is brought as a lamb to the slaughter. And as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he opens not his mouth. So I'd be highlighting that as well. Jesus, he's dying for his murderers. He's dying for those that put him to death. He prays, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Jesus, just his love. And yet, how have we responded to that? How have you and I responded? We have life here today. We have health, strength. Every moment of our life is a gift from Jesus because he died for you, died for me. This is something I'd be bringing out to the class. It's a really important. So I've got that highlighted here. And so question 3, my micro point is this. Though despised and rejected of men, Christ gave himself a sacrifice that we might be forgiven and accepted with God. Hey, Brother Stephen on Instagram, how are you? Wave. So that's the third micro point that I'll be bringing out there. Though despised and rejected of men, Christ gave himself a sacrifice that we might be forgiven and accepted with God. So he sacrificed himself for those who rejected and despised him and put him to death. It was really for them that he was dying. And now we see him forsaken by a people pleaser. Okay, the next section, number 4. So now he gets taken from this court of Caiaphas to Pilate, because the Jews couldn't, even though they said, all right, this is blasphemy. He says he's the Son of God. That's blasphemy. Man making himself God. Therefore, he's guilty of death. Everyone voted on that. But they could not put him to death without the sanction of the Roman government. And so he was sent to Pilate. And then you've got him under the question, section 4, coming now to Pilate. And here we see once more, he's forsaken even of Pilate, the courts of justice of the land. All right, so it brings out here, under section 4, Pilate's attitude towards Jesus. Firstly, they accused him of being king of the Jews, the chief and priest did, of calling himself king of the Jews. So Pilate asked him, are you a king? Are you the king of the Jews? And he said unto him, you say it. In other words, you've said it. They're your words. So Jesus did not deny it, but he just put it back to Pilate that you've said that. So what you've said is true. Basically, he's saying that. And so now Pilate wants to get to release him. He says he doesn't want to put a king to death, the king of the Jews to death, particularly not someone who he appears to be so innocent. And so he just can see the scheme here, the plot, the deep plot. The note brings out the deep plot that had been devised to destroy Jesus. Okay, an innocent man who stood in the way of the Jewish dignitaries. Pilate saw all through that. And seeing all through it, you would think he'd have the courage of his convictions to do the right thing. Sadly, he was a people pleaser. All right, so what did he do? Well, you could bring this out. It comes out here under the note, under section B. But as you know, the custom of those days, during the Passover, the Romans would release one man free of who was guilty of death. They would release him, give him his freedom, and the people had the right to choose who that man would be. So Pilate thought, well, look, surely the chief priest wanted to put Jesus to death, but Pilate thought, well, maybe the people would surely see through all this. And so he appeals to the people, who do you want me to release? Jesus or this man? Now they brought forth a thief and a robber. His name was Barabbas. He'd created insurrection. He was a religious uprising, and he was a hardened and desperate villain bent on rebellion and cruelty. So this was the man that he put before them, Barabbas, who clearly, to the people and to everyone looking, clearly was, a man worthy of the punishment he was about to receive as a thief, robber, and religious rebel. Okay, but instead of doing that, they said, no, we want, instead of saying we want Jesus, and they said, no, we want Barabbas. And so Pilate's like, what? You want Barabbas? What about this Jesus? What will I do with him? And they cry out, crucify him, crucify him. So no matter what he could do, there's no way he could get out of dispensing with Christ, short of overriding the chief priests and the people and releasing Jesus, finding him no fault in him at all. But even though he found no fault in him, he still had him subjected to be crucified. So sadly, even the government of the day forsakes Jesus, even though they could see he was an innocent man. So corrupt was the times. So that's the point I'll be bringing out here. I've got that under section C. I've got a hash symbol there. And so my point here would be that many injustices are suffered when we seek to please people instead of God. Okay, when you're seeking to please people, many injustices are suffered. God wants judges and people to exercise righteous judgment, which means they're not open to bribery, they're not open to bias, they're not partial. They're people who see right and wrong and make a fair decision based on what's right and not what's pleasing to people. So that's the kind of judgment we want. And when we don't do that, many injustices result, and people are hurt. People are unjustly hurt. Innocent suffer, as it was the case here with Jesus. So that's the point I'll be bringing out here. The dangers of people pleasing, all right? Question, and then now leads us to our next section. Although forsaken betrayed by a friend, forsaken by a close friend, despised and rejected of men, of the leaders, and then despised and rejected of the people, and then of the rulers of the land, the Lord of the land. The one thing, there was one person who never forsook Jesus, and that was God, his Father in heaven. And that's a wonderful assurance for us. And that's what this last section brings out. God never forsakes us. So you can see, I would be highlighting this, how desperate Jesus was in his undone condition here, where he's forsaken by everybody. He's feeling the terrible weight of sins, all the guilt of the sin of the world is laid upon him. And he is under this terrible weight, feeling darkness and despair, feeling shut out from the pleasure of God. He cries out. And that's what the note brings, or the verse brings out. He cries out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Jesus didn't cry out, Peter, or Judas, why have you forsaken me? Peter, why have you forsaken me? John, why have you forsaken me? He didn't cry out to why his disciples forsook him. He didn't cry out why the Jewish priests and leaders forsook him, people or Pilate. He cried out why God forsook him. He could not bear the sense of his Father's displeasure and forsaking what he felt like the forsaking of himself, the Father forsaking Jesus. He could not bear with that. But you know what? The note brings out, and I'd be concentrating on this note for a little bit here, because the note brings out that even in that time of darkness and despair, Jesus gained the victory. How? He did not die under depression. He did not die in discouragement. He died in faith. How? How did he do that? Well, and this is a lesson for us. Jesus, though he's feeling forsaken by God, you've got to look at the facts. Don't go by your feelings. Just look at the facts. What had God said of Jesus? The Apostle John, I should say, says, if your conscience condemns you, God is greater than your conscience. But if your conscience doesn't condemn you, you have great boldness with God. So with Jesus, his conscience didn't condemn him. He had performed his Father's will. He had walked in the will and the ways of his Father. He had obeyed his Father every step of the way. And in fact, what had the Father said? You remember those times the Father had said to him, this is at the baptism and a couple of other times, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. So what did Jesus do under discouragement and despair? Instead of, sinking in depression at the thought of the moment, he went back to where he last saw the light. He looked at the past evidences of his Father's favor. And that's what gave him strength to bear with what he was going through now. He had his Father's assurance of acceptance. He was beloved of his Father. He was accepted of his Father. And that's what gave him strength to endure this last great trial. And so it says here, by faith, it says here, he was acquainted with the character of his Father. It says he relied in those dreadful hours. The note brings this out. In those dreadful hours, he had relied upon the evidence of his Father's acceptance heretofore given him. So not there at the cross. The Father didn't come down and give him any assurance at the cross. What what Christ relied upon was what the Father had already done for him in the past. And that's what we'll have to rely upon in our darkest moments and when we're despairing. Looking at the evidence of our Father's acceptance of us. Okay, it says here, Jesus was acquainted with the character of his Father. He understood his justice, okay, his mercy, and his great love. Jesus understood that. And by faith, he rested on him whom he had ever been his joy to obey. And as in submission, he committed himself to God. It says here, the sense of the loss of his Father's favor was withdrawn. By faith, Christ was the victor. It's beautiful, beautiful note, beautiful note. That's something that we can learn from. Okay, so I've got that as a big asterisk there. That's something I'll be discussing in my class. And that leads now to the last section. Although we may be forsaken by the most nearest and dearest to us, what does God promise us? Well, beautiful, beautiful verses here of assurance, isn't it? When father or mother forsake me, the Lord will take me up, right? And even though my mother and father forsake me, the Lord will take me up. He will never leave me. That's what it says there in Hebrews 13, verse 5. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. And beautiful Isaiah 49, verse 16. Beautiful, beautiful verse. I have graven thee on the palms of my hands. And how did Jesus do that? How did Jesus do that? Jesus put his hands on the cross of Calvary and was crucified there. The nails driven through his hands, through the palms of his hands, were the nails that should have been driven through our hands, but instead they were driven through his. And that's how much he loves us. There's one saying, one little meme that goes like this. The question was asked, how much, the question asked, Lord, how much do you love me? And Jesus said, this much. And he opened his hands and died. Opened his hands and died. This much. And that was the cross of Calvary when he stretched his hands. That's how much he loves us. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. I mean, God never forsakes us. He will never forsake those who fully trust in him as their constant helper. So remember that God is your constant helper. And if when you're putting your trust fully in him, trusting in the Lord Jesus to lead you step by step into the right path, you can derive assurance and strength. It says here, at every step you advance, for you can be assured that your hand is in his hand. And you can run and not be weary. You can walk and not faint, for you can realize by faith that you have your hand in the hand of Christ. You will not sink under discouragement, for as you follow on to know the Lord, trusting in him, you will have the assurance that one who never forsakes those who fully trust him is your constant helper. That's what I'd be highlighting here under section 5. Okay, that's where I've got my hash symbol, because that's the point I'm going to bring out. So I've got here under 5, God will never forsake those who place their trust fully in him despite their circumstances. So there you have it. That's a real quick summary of the lesson. So I've got there. So the 5 points again. Now, keep in mind, I'm giving you this like a sermonette, okay, or I don't know, just a lecture, I suppose. Don't teach it like I'm teaching it here. I'm just highlighting for you the points and giving you some pointers to how I'd be sharing this in class. Remember, in class, you want to be asking the questions, thought questions, to make the people think, to make your students think, to draw out of them what they understand by the lesson verses, by the lesson notes, and get them thinking about how it relates to them personally. All right. So don't just ask the question, read the Bible verse, read the note, and move on to the next question. That's not teaching the lesson. Remember that. All right. So what we want to do is ask questions that are going to bring out the points for each day. So those points, just very briefly again. Point number 1, the micro point number 1 under Sunday. If we only have a superficial religion, it will lead to our betrayal of Christ and our eternal death. Point number 2 from Monday, though we may have forsaken Christ, forgotten him, his eternal love constantly seeks to win us back. Section 3, despised and rejected of men. Though despised and rejected of men, Christ gave himself a sacrifice that we might be forgiven and accepted with God. Point number 4, micro point 4, many injustices are suffered when we seek to please people instead of God. And point number 5, point number 5, God will never forsake those who place their trust fully in him despite the circumstances. And so those points, dear friends, listeners, those points are the 5 points that become my micro points, and I'm going to summarize those to my key point, which is this: though Christ was forsaken by all, God never forsook him because he trusted fully in him. So it may be with us. No matter how dark the circumstances, God will never forsake you when you put your trust fully in Christ. And so friends will forsake you, people will forsake you, people will betray you, they'll let you down, you'll become discouraged, you'll become depressed, but you need not despair. God does not forsake those who trust in him. That's the key idea, I think, coming through the lesson for this week. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching on Instagram, guys. Hi. Thanks for watching on YouTube. And people, please share it, like, subscribe. And if you subscribe on YouTube, for those on Instagram, it's youtube.com/Engelion, Engellion. You can go over there and subscribe. And basically, for those on YouTube, you can actually then be able to read the lesson when I'm when I'm pointing things out. You'll be able to read it left to right. Okay. So this is on Instagram, back to front. I know, but just go over to YouTube to the channel, and you'll be able to read through there as I'm pointing out the points. So thanks for watching. Take care. As I said, like, share, subscribe, and see you next week. Bye for now. See you, guys. Have a great Sabbath wherever you are. Until next time. God bless you all. Bye for now. Ending on Instagram, and I'm going to end on YouTube. Ending the stream here on YouTube right now. End stream. Yes, I want to end it. Bye-bye. God bless you.